All right, today we're going to tackle a really tough but incredibly important topic. It's a health crisis that's happening all around us, but so often it's happening in complete silence. We're going to break down the complex factors behind the epidemic of male suicide. We'll look at the data, the cultural pressures, and what we can actually do about it.
13 minutes. Take a second and think about that. In the United States, that's roughly how often a man dies by suicide. It's an absolutely staggering number, and it forces you to ask a really hard question. What on earth is going on?
So, to really get a handle on the scale of this, we have to start with the numbers, because the data, well, it reveals a shocking imbalance that you just can't ignore. And the imbalance is, wow, it's stark. Men make up about half the population, right? Yet they account for nearly 80%. That's a staggering 4 out of every 5 deaths by suicide in the US. That's not a small gap, that's a canyon. This gets us to something that researchers call the gender paradox. It's a bit complicated, but here's the gist. While women often report having more suicidal thoughts and actually attempt suicide more often, men die by suicide at a much, much higher rate. And the main reason for this tragic gap? It comes down to the methods used. Men are far more likely to use means that are so lethal, there's simply no second chance.
But these numbers, they don't just appear out of thin air. They're symptoms of something much deeper. These unwritten cultural rules about what it means to be a man. And that rulebook can create this immense and often totally invisible pressure.
Now, a key idea for understanding this pressure is something sociologists call hegemonic masculinity. It sounds academic, I know, but just think of it as the traditional, old-school blueprint for manhood. Be tough, be stoic, be completely self-reliant, and whatever you do, never, ever show vulnerability. Following this blueprint to the letter, well, it can have absolutely devastating consequences.
And this isn't just theory. Here's the real-world impact of that blueprint. Men who stick really rigidly to these traditional masculine norms are 2.4 times more likely to die by suicide. The very traits that our culture has historically framed as strength are ironically creating a critical vulnerability.
Then there's this other massive pressure, the provider role. For so many men, their entire identity is wrapped up in being able to provide financially. As one source puts it so well, failing to do that is seen as an existential threat. So losing a job isn't just a practical problem, it feels like a fundamental failure of who you are as a man. And the impact of tying your identity so tightly to your job is just staggering. Men who primarily define themselves this way, as providers, are over 16 times more likely to think about suicide when they run into financial trouble. It just goes to show you how deeply an economic crisis can become an existential one.
You know, this all comes back to that old, damaging idea that boys don't cry. When emotions like sadness or fear are pushed down, they don't just disappear. That pain builds and builds, and often anger becomes the only acceptable way to express it. This can kick off a terrible downward spiral, unhealthy coping mechanisms, pushing people away, and this internal pressure cooker that just feels completely unmanageable.
But this isn't just about what's going on inside someone's head. The problem is amplified by bigger societal systems, and, this is crucial, by the way we talk about this issue, or, more often, the way we don't talk about it.
The family court system, for example, can be a huge source of stress. Losing daily contact with your kids during a divorce is absolutely devastating for any parent. And when you see that mothers become the custodial parent in about 80% of cases, men whose identities are deeply tied to being a father can feel this profound sense of loss and despair.
And we see a similar kind of disparity over in the criminal justice system. For the exact same crimes, men, on average, get sentences that are 63% longer, and women are about twice as likely to avoid going to prison at all. For men caught in the system, this can just deepen feelings of hopelessness and a sense that the world is profoundly unfair. And finally, there's the role the media plays. The way news stories cover male suicide often frames it through a lens of aggression, focusing on the violent details of the act rather than the immense suffering that led to it. This narrative completely fails to portray the man as a victim of a health crisis, and it reinforces the very same silence that stops other men from ever reaching out for help. So, given this really complex web of cultural, personal, and systemic factors, what can actually be done? Where do we even start? Well, the source material actually lays out a pretty clear, multi-pronged approach for a path forward. Look, the solution isn't one simple thing. It's got to be a change at every single level of society.
Public health campaigns need to hammer home the message that asking for help is an act of strength, not weakness. Our healthcare system needs to be better tailored to men, training doctors to recognize that things like anger or drinking too much can be cries for help. Our institutions, like courts, need to take a hard look at potential biases, and really, as a whole society, we just need to start challenging these rigid, outdated definitions of what it means to be a man and just start talking openly and honestly.
And that leaves us with this. This is the final crucial question. It really is the core of the entire challenge. How do we, in our own families, with our friends and our communities, build a world where a man's strength isn't measured by the burdens he carries in silence, but by his courage to share them? It's a conversation that can and literally does save lives.